The year 2020 was an unexpected year. I think that it's been an experience like none other in my life. I began the year in Saudi Arabia, which was a new experience for me. COVID struck, of course, as it did with everyone, quite out of the blue. But I think what we saw happen in China became very obvious for us in the technology industry that it would spread quite quickly. So having that insight on how exponential curves work really gave us the opportunity, I think, to get ahead of the curve in some of those areas and move fast. And I think whenever you have disruptive events like this, and having been through the Asian crisis, the Lehman crisis, etc., when you understand how these things are likely to fold out, if you move really fast, you have some tremendous opportunities. You know, it was much like the Lehman shock in many ways, though it manifested in a very different way. I mean, this was driven at the customer level. So if you had a look, I think JP Morgan put out a working capital advisory, but I think in the US, on average, if I recall, the number is they had about 27 days worth of capital until they were, your average SME was in a distressed state. And what we'd seen in China was anything up to 1 million SMEs forecast to go out of business very early in the crisis. So as COVID started spreading across countries, you knew that was likely to follow. So the economic shock was tremendous, but equally was, there was a very rapid government response on this in relative terms, I must add, where, funding started to flow out and bail out those businesses. And you've seen, enormous amounts of impact in the financial industry, which has made it actually very hard to predict, because you can't predict this artificial stimulus in terms of looking at fundamental economics and core metrics of companies. So, it's kind of dragged out the crisis from a banking perspective this time. And I think that probably 2021 is the year that we'll start to see the real impact of what's happened during 2020 from an economic standpoint. So what it's encouraged is this enormous amount of innovation and creativity and acceleration in the technology industry. And I think we'd all be aware of that. But I think I've seen a couple of very interesting opportunities really open up, which probably wouldn't have happened as quickly, if it wasn't for COVID. So, for me, there's this tremendous upside from being on the technology side of the industry versus being on the balance sheet side. The difference is between banking and insurance. I think you saw fairly much an immediate effect on banking, and you had a banking industry that had been largely preparing for digital for many years. In many instances, the insurance industry was completely unprepared. So it really didn't have that same level of customer interaction, etc. So I think, if you look particularly in Japan, Japan has this enormous agency base. And all of a sudden, they're pretty much out of business because no one wants to meet random people anymore. So unless you have that ability to go direct for digital, I think that's a huge barrier for the insurance industry, versus in banking, in many ways, we're somewhat readier for that. The second, I think, was around the use of data and information and keeping customers abreast of what was going on. I think in the banking industry, it was very easy to use data sciences to quickly get to some pretty interesting numbers that could actually help your customers and get on top of that, so you're in a position to really drive that forward. The insurance industry was quite the opposite. I mean, customers were met with silence and uncertainty, which is exactly what you don't want in insurance. You're meant to be there for when there's an event that you're the trusted party that you rely on. And yet the silence was kind of deafening from an insurance standpoint, because they're simply don't have those channels open as frequently. They don't have as much control over the data as you see in banking. So I think there's been, if you'd like to think of it, a real two-tier race in terms of digital from a financial services industry standpoint. I think every day that we're on the planet is a great day. So 2021 will be more from that. But I think the financial reckoning is yet to come. I think we've had markets that are artificially inflated by just simply printing money and artificially propping them up. I think now you're seeing the foreign exchange markets starting to react. You're starting to see tension in foreign exchange markets. I think today the US labeled Switzerland a currency manipulator and Vietnam. And yet, I think what's happening in the US shows that there's massive manipulation in many different areas of the US right now. So it's kind of quite ironic, but I think the flow through next year will mean that, again, I think that it will amplify the opportunities for fintech and insurtech, and that the ability to move fast and react quickly and to help, the existing institutions do that should be highly valued. And in the past crises, I've been lucky enough to work for companies that moved really quick and made an enormous amount of money in a very short period of time by simply being ahead of the pack. And I think, if you look at the core role of technology, the sole purpose of technology is to arbitrage time. And if you can arbitrage time, you have a competitive advantage and you live in your competitor's future. And that timing advantage is everything. So I think 2021 will be, again, great for the tech industry. I think for the financial services industry, this is going to be one really tough year ahead.